I had my own neuroimaging lab at the time, doing brain scanning experiments, and one evening one of the subjects slotted for the experiment didn't show up. So we didn't want to waste the scanner time, and I got into the machine. And I learned from my friend and collaborator, Jonathan, from the control room that there was something wrong. And he came into the room and put his hand on mine and said, David, there's something in your brain and we can't do the experiment. And that's how I learned that I had brain cancer. When we looked at the images, I really got worried because it couldn't be much else than a brain tumor. Well, I knew it wasn't good. There's not much that can be in your brain that would be good. When my father picked up the telephone on the other side of the Atlantic, I could hear his joy at getting my call. My heart sank. It was as if I was about to plant a dagger in his chest. Dad, I found out I have a brain cancer. I heard him choke up. Oh, David, this can't be.
David's father was Jean-Jacques Servan-Schreiber, a high-profile journalist and best-selling author in France who died last year. Expectations were high for young David coming from such a well-known family, and he proved himself. David became a founding member of Médecins Sans Frontières, and he was on his way to becoming a leading neuroscientist.
I was 31 years old. I'd gone to medical school. I had finished a PhD in cognitive neuroscience under a Nobel laureate. I already had my own lab at the university when I was finishing my training as a psychiatrist, so it really looked like I had the world at my feet. Cancer hit right out in that blue sky. It was quite a shock. After the first treatment, I didn't change anything in my lifestyle because nobody suggested that it would make any difference. And I thought I was very confident in my own profession, you know, in science, in the medical system. And I thought, okay, we did the best we could. The rest is up to God, you know. I don't need to do anything. And that was just plain wrong.
And so David at first continued life as before, drinking his usual 4 Pepsis a day, eating a diet rich in sugar and fat. It was only after a serious relapse and another surgery and another full course of radiation and chemotherapy that he decided to begin his own cancer research.
Well, what I've learned when I try to understand as much as I could about cancer, that this is an epidemic. That everybody agrees this is an epidemic. It's not because we're growing older or that we do more systematic detection, because children have more cancers than they ever used to. So something about our way of life is creating this cancer epidemic. So of course it is reversible. We need to change the factors in our environment and in our way of living that promote cancer growth and backtrack, get back to things that are much healthier for our body.
The World Cancer Research Foundation issued a report last year that states that an astonishing 40% of cancers in the West are preventable simply by getting a little bit more exercise and making some changes in how we eat. For Servan-Schreiber, that is the key. You might be surprised what he calls the #1 cancer promoter in the West. It's not pollution or pesticides. For Servan-Schreiber, it's sugar.
We went from eating 5 kilograms of white sugar per person per year in the 1800s to eating roughly 70 kilograms per person per year in 2000. Now, sugar feeds cancer growth directly. Cancer cells cannot feed on anything else than raw sugar. In fact, to detect cancer in the body, we do a PET scan that measures where does radioactive sugar accumulate in the body. And sugar also creates inflammation in the body, which is favorable to cancer growth and dispersion throughout the body.
But for Servan-Schreiber, sugar is part of a much bigger problem. He calls them inflammatory foods, foods that he claims create fertile ground for cancers to grow in our bodies, and he says that play a key role in the growth and spread of cancer cells.
The second thing that is a big factor is the fats in our diet. Trans fats, which everybody's heard about, were invented around 1940 and have spread dramatically since then. Now they're in practically everything we eat. And we know they trigger inflammation, and they therefore help feed cancer growth as well.
Servan-Schreiber even contends that the industrial production of food, the way we raise our animals for consumption today, produces more cancers. Controversially, he claims that since cows stopped eating a steady diet of grass, our dairy products are no longer helping the body fend off and fight cancer.
The fact that we've changed the way we feed animals since the Second World War has a profound impact on our inability to resist disease now, because we don't get the nutrients that we used to get when the animals fed on grass. And now that they only feed on soy and corn, they're not part of the milk, of cheese, of meat, of butter, or eggs, and therefore they're not part of us.
And it's not just that newer farming techniques have taken away the beneficial nutrients, foods that once had what he calls anti-cancer properties. Servan-Schreiber claims they are now cancer promoters.
I was raised partly on the farm in Normandy, and my grandmother used to feed me eggs from the farm. And we have data about these eggs, not our farm, but there's been scientific studies about the eggs of 1960. The eggs of 1960 were filled with omega-3 fatty acids that help slow down inflammation and help slow down cancer growth in the body. If you buy eggs in the supermarket today, plain eggs, there are almost no omega-3 fatty acids in them. So the nature of the eggs has changed completely. What used to be a health food has become a pro-inflammatory food.
And while we eat more of the foods that Servan-Schreiber says promote cancer, he also says we eat fewer of the foods that fight against the growth of cancer cells.
It is well documented that certain kinds of foods that contain very potent anti-cancer phytochemicals, including foods as simple as broccoli, help clean up some of the toxins that are in our body that we're exposed to from environmental contaminants.
Servan-Schreiber's thesis is dramatic, and it doesn't stop at the foods we eat. He contends that a combination of eating anti-cancer foods and getting more exercise and more relaxation can be equally as effective as the expensive drugs used in fighting some cancers.
One of the most effective drugs to help reduce the risk of a breast cancer relapse after a first bout is called Herceptin. It's very effective. It reduces the risk of a relapse by 50%. It costs $50,000 per year for a single patient. Now, we have studies showing recently that walking 30 minutes 6 times per week reduces the relapse risk after breast cancer by 50%. We haven't heard nearly as much about this, and we hear about Herceptin.
And it doesn't stop there. Servan-Schreiber also takes on the controversial subject of cell phones and their electromagnetic fields that we place right next to our brains every time we talk on the phone.
We have studies looking at whether people who use their cell phones have more cancers or not. Most of these studies say they don't. But look at how they've been done. They've looked at people who use their phones for less than 10 years in general, because cell phones is such a recent technology. If you had people smoke a pack a day for 10 years, you would see zero effect on lung cancer. In fact, nobody knows anyone who had lung cancer at age 25 or 30, because it takes 15 to 30 years before cancer develops after an exposure of this type. So all of these studies that tell us there's no effect that have lasted less than 10 years are basically worthless. Then there are a few studies that have looked at people who use their phones for more than 10 years and an hour a day or more. And in these people, it finds roughly a doubling of the risk of brain tumors, 100% more.
And what precautions does Servan-Schreiber prescribe? Well, he says, among other things, you should keep the phone away from your body, use a speakerphone or a Bluetooth ear device. He says you should use your cell phone sparingly, not for lengthy conversations. And he also says to avoid using it when the signal is weak, and switch ears regularly to avoid long-term exposure on one side of your brain. He also says children under the age of 12 should not use cell phones. So what about his own condition? Well, David Servan-Schreiber's tumor itself has stopped growing, but the genetic analysis of it shows that it still has an aggressive biology. So he says he's still got a shadow hanging over his head. He now says he's going to stick with what he calls his own simple quartet of rules.
as I learned to eat differently, to move my body differently, to manage my stress differently, to avoid contaminants in my environment differently, I actually developed a much more vibrant sense of life, a life that was more alive. And I would never go back to living like I used to, independently of cancer, just because life is better this way.